Yeah. Why don't we start talking a little bit about some of the different kinds of things you can collect? Books. Howard books are probably the biggest thing that people collect, and there's a lot of them. From the paperbacks from the 60s and 70s to the Gnome editions that were Conan editions that were published in the 50s. There's 3 Arkham House editions that are grails for a lot of people.
So we're going to go backward in time and start with the current stuff.
The current stuff.
If you want to read Howard before collecting him, where should you start? And who wants to do that?
Yeah, Lee, you want to talk about that? The Wandering Stars and the Del Reyes?
Before that, the common stuff.
Okay. Yes. Well, a core collection would be, certainly all the Del Rey versions. There were Wandering Star hardbacks before that, but at least the Del Reys are all available now. Just a lot of the Robert E. Howard Foundation hardbacks for the rarer stories.
Anyone in there who has never read a Howard story or many years ago? Okay. So where should you start? I think the Del Reys would be the
place to start.
The best start, and you either choose the Conan volumes or the 2 best of volumes. And these are really cheap. I think the full price is $15, something like that, I think. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't like what you read in those 2 best of volumes, I would advise stop reading at this point.
For those of you that do want to read more, if you are a Howard completist and you want to catch every Howard story, the Del Reys are, of course, the authoritative text. These are the best text versions we have. But the Howard Foundation is publishing everything that Del Rey is not. So between those 2 publishers, if you get all of the Howard Del Reys and you get all of the Robert E. Howard Foundation press books, you will have basically everything that Howard has ever published in the best text versions available between those 2 publishers. So you can do that, and you can get everything Howard.
Yeah, with a little time and some patience and some money, of course, you can pretty much get everything, every word Robert Howard ever wrote during his lifetime. So, which is kind of cool because I don't think you can say that about that many authors. Yeah. The questions after, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Unless one quick about this particular type of reading. Is there a difference between the University of Nebraska stuff and the Del Rey stuff? I know that
the text in the Bison books are mostly correct, but of course we did discover many typescript. If you were present this morning when we showed the typescripts, and in many instances we have found the original typescripts in Glenn Hall's collection. And so of course all the Del Reys are the latest source we have, so they are the purest version available. Then again, the Bison books are really close to that. But for instance, in the Bison book, you get the boxing stories one, and the version they use of Iron Man is not the final one. At the time, we thought it was the final one. Turns out it wasn't. So if you want to get the best version, Howard's final version, you have to get the Fist of Iron book from the Robert Howard Foundation.
So basically, the reason to have the Nebraska is you're a total completist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
and you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly what this panel is about. The people like us.
Yeah.
They want it all, right? So.
Your inner nerd is welcome here.
So you mentioned the Bisons. Before that, there's also the Bane paperbacks in the 90s. And then what many people probably grew up reading, were the paperbacks of the 60s and 70s. That back during the first Howard boom that we're all familiar with. Many of those are still very collectible, especially the Frazetta covers.
Or the Lancers.
The Lancers in particular, and they were redone as Ace later on. A lot of people collect those because they have wonderful covers, even if the texts inside are decampinated. This isn't a panel about that.
Well, today, yes, decamp are.
So, but during that boom, a lot of stuff that people collect is from that period beginning in the mid '60s with the release of the first Lancer. 1970, the first Marvel Conan came out. Which became tremendously popular. A lot of Conan's popularity is because of the comics in the '70s. The paperbacks all came out during that period. Lots of fanzines came out during that period. So that's for Howard collectors that want to get into a lot of really good stuff that's still affordable, unlike the pulps and things like that. Collecting some of the things from the 70s, there's some neat stuff from that period, from that first Howard boom. And so let's talk about some of that. Bobby, you want to? I know you've got a lot of cool, obscure stuff from that period.
I've got a few obscure things.
Yep.
One thing you have to remember about the 1970s is that it wasn't just the Lancer paperbacks. Marvel comic books has started off with Conan the Barbarian, which spread into magazine-sized formats. They were being adapted across the pond in the United Kingdom in different formats. You had a lot of little chapbooks that Glenn Lord was going to these little fan presses like Necronomicon Press, and these are still fairly affordable when you can find them. Some of them aren't so much, but one thing you did not get in the 70s was Robert E. Howard's letters. These were published very piecemeal in little fan booklets and paperbacks, the Conan Sword Book, the Conan Grimoire, that sort of thing. The most comprehensive collection we have is the 3 volumes plus index and addenda from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. Unfortunately, those are out of print. So if anybody's looking for an affordable collection of Robert E. Howard's letters, I would suggest A Means to Freedom, which is a 2-volume paperback set recently re-released by Hippocampus Press. And if you really like that one and you want more, the index and addenda actually has some of the drafts. Robert E. Howard wouldn't just sit down and write a letter to H.P. Lovecraft. He drafted out because he had long, involved arguments that he'd like to get into, and some of those drafts were saved and reproduced. If you get into the real minutiae, these are some of the fan collections, fragments of the letters that were republished in the fan press. These are hideously expensive when they come up, even though they're really only of interest to people with complete anal retentiveness about getting everything. And if you get the complete letters, you've got everything. Lee, did you want to add one?
Yeah. If you want to figure out how to systematically get this older stuff, I would first refer you to the howardworks.com website, which is Paul Herman's online version, up to date, of his The Never-Ending Hunt book. That is the comprehensive bibliography.
It's now being
for
updated
Howard.
by Bill Tom.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Yes,
Tom.
yes,
Yeah,
certainly.
it was started up by Todd Woods.
That's right.
Ah, right.
Yes, yeah.
And Lee, let me add to that. Let me plug Lee here for a minute. Lee has been assiduously cataloging every secondary source
that's
on
true.
Robert E. Howard. All of the fanzines and chapbooks and journals about people writing about Howard's work, many of which are also collectible, especially some of the earlier and rarer stuff, things like the Howard Collector that Glenn Lord put out, early issues of REH to Glen Raconteur and the Howard Review by Damon Sasser and Dennis McHaney, respectively.
Yes.
You know, talk about some of those. What are some of the
Well,
toughest
you're-
ones to get? And some of the more collectible ones. What do you think?
Oh, gee.
Things about
Well,
Howard.
one, yes. Well, the Acolyte and
Yeah. Oh, I didn't read the Acolyte. Did I read
yeah,
What about Riders of the Dark?
and
yeah.
the Pantograph that
Okay.
had the Hyborian Age.
That's this. This is a rare fanzine from the 1930s. These are incredibly rare and fragile.
This is what Howard's the Hyborian Age first ran in 3 chapters.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's ridiculously rare. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
and of course, in this table, you have 3 guys who had them, right?
Who have the whole set.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably 3 of
Find
only a
the net.
handful in the country, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, they're probably in such poor condition, such fragile condition that we won't even see a facsimile version as have been printed for, say, the Marvel
Fantasy Fan,
Tales
yep.
and
Right.
the Fantasy Fan, which we should also mention. That
Here's the
Howard
Fantasy
and-
Fan.
yeah.
This was another fanzine from the 30s. This has the first publication of Gods of the North. Does anybody know what that story You guys know what this is, right? It's Frost Giant's Daughter, right? So this was the first publication of a Conan story that was rejected by Weird Tales. So Howard changed the name. It's actually changed twice, and the editor changed it again. But he sent it to a fanzine editor, and he published it here in 1934 in this very rare fanzine. So this was, it's amazing to read these early fanzines from the 1930s. You'll see the beginnings of modern fandom. It's all here. Guys talking about collecting in here in the 1930s already, and trading pulps and selling pulps with each other. And you see people like Forey Ackerman. How many people have heard of Forey Ackerman, right? You guys know Forey Ackerman. A young 16, 17-year-old Forey Ackerman getting into a flame war with Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith about how his fiction, it's not real scientific fiction. You should keep that stuff out of Wonder Stories, and it should be in Weird Tales where it belongs. It's just like the internet, except snail mail. Fans being jerks and to each other and fighting and arguing over minutia and trying to define genres. All of this was taking place in these early fanzines, and they're so rare, but very, very cool. Yeah.
And of course, when the Conan books came out from Lancer in 1966, this led 4 years later to the publication by Marvel Comics, the comic book Conan the Barbarian, by which I suppose many of us discovered Conan through Marvel Comics version. And this came out in 1970, and but before that, there were many obscure, rare, off-the-path publications, and Bobby is the one who's going to talk about that, right? And you can start with the Mexican comics.
Here you go, Bobby.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try not to get yours mixed with mine.
So this is something, I suspect that most of you are not familiar with what we are going to see.
Okay, so in the 1950s, the Mexican comics were partially subsidized by the government in terms of paper, and they produced La Reina de Costa Negra, which is...
I got some of the early 50 ones in there,
Yeah.
if you want to see. They're tiny, yeah. Those are so rare.
La Reina de Costa Negra, the Queen of the Black Coast. These were Adventures of Elite with a blonde Conan, which, it sounds silly to us today because we think of Conan as dark raven locks and all that, but Jeff's got a lot more than I do.
He's a nerd.
He's a nerd.
Probably
It's actually fun. Before Marvel did Conan the Barbarian proper, they actually licensed adaptions of some of his horror stories because Marvel was copying DC's new 60s horror story vibe. And you can see two of them here. And in addition to this, you have really little obscure stuff. It's the stuff you don't normally think about. This is from the Texas Trio. It's an independent comic. This wasn't even really in the underground comics, but this has an adaptation of Gods of the North.
Gods of the North, yeah.
And this was 1968,
Yeah.
and one of the early readers of that publication was a guy named George R. Martin. Maybe you've heard of him.
Yep, he read that. He was part of Texas fandom and Southwest West fandom in the 60s, which was really big. Just to note, that story in there is the first licensed comic adaptation of a Howard work. So it predates Marvel's Conan #1 by 2 years.
By 2 years.
The Mexican comics, although those are older, they were bootlegs. They were unauthorized. In fact, in some of those, they were swiping DC's Viking prints, like right off the,
They stopped publication in 1967 because Elsbrek de Camp got wind of the publication, so he sent them a letter. Oh, by the way, I've heard that you're publishing La Reina de la Costa Negra. And all of them, they never replied to the letter, and they stopped publishing the comic book, for whatever reason.
I didn't bring any, but I should mention Crom the Barbarian, who was...
I have a copy.
Jake's, yes.
I did have a copy.
All right, he was an early pastiche of Conan the Barbarian created by Gardner F. Fox. And one of the interesting things is that when they were running through Marvel's Conan the Barbarian, they adapted some of Fox's Barbarian stories as Conan stories.
Right.
Of course, one of the things you don't get a lot of is after the success of the Conan the Barbarian movie in 1981, it created a huge boom of interest in the comic books themselves. And
Okay, by the way, I was
go.
wanting to hold it.
all right.
That's a French mag, by the way.
Yeah, this is Metal Hurlons, which is the original version of what we in the U.S. call Heavy Metal Magazine. It's one of the first adult-oriented magazines for comics fans. What it is, France, Spain, Italy, most of Europe except the United Kingdom did not have the Comics Code Authority and the restraints that the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom had. So they continued to produce comics aimed at an adult audience, and because it didn't kill off crime or horror, they did not have quite the stigma toward romance, westerns, science fiction, fantasy, all the good stuff. Yeah, go.
Well, actually, we did have similar lows. It's a long story. I'm going to go into that.
Go for it.
So why don't we go back a little further in time?
What about Conan #1? I think you had it.
Oh, yeah, you want to hold up Conan #1 there just
I've
for
got a
minute?
couple of Conans.
Yeah. So,
Well,
yeah, just real quick, the Conan the first few Conan comics, the collectible ones are the first 24 issues, the ones that Barry Windsor Smith did. But why don't we talk about some of the earlier stuff?
well,
Yeah, you got
except I want to
something,
get, yeah. If you're a fan of Howard, and especially if you've started collecting him, you may well find yourself wanting to know more about the man himself. You might be curious as to where he got his ideas and background for his stories. He was a complex, interesting individual, and just plain fascinating to learn about. There's still many questions and uncertainties about him, but we've made a lot of progress in the last 20 years. Foremost is the availability now of a biography close to being called definitive, and that's Mark Finn's Blood and Thunder, especially the second edition published by the Robert E. Howard Foundation, shown here. But if you're not up for an entire book, there's always Rusty Burke's REH short biography. That's online also at the Foundation's website. If you're still hankering for more, there's always Sprague de Camp's Dark Valley Destiny, but only if you're willing to try filtering out the personal biases and amateur psychoanalysis that mars the book.
Did you say amateur or immature?
If you can do that, it is, being the first ever full-scale Howard biography, it's actually worth reading for its interviews and background details. Okay. Four more, I think I have skipped. There we go. For more personal insight into Howard's life, you can't do better than to read the memoir, One Who Walked Alone, by Novelyn Price Ellis, who actually knew Howard because she dated him. And she did do this in part to rectify the Howard was crazy psychoanalysis by DeCamp. This book, however, was in fact the basis of the movie The Whole Wide World, and which is also well worth seeing. If you want to try to get the information from the horse's mouth, you might want to try reading Howard's own Post Oaks and Sandruffs. But it's only semi-autobiographical, and it was written early in his career. It's also expensive to get, but it's going to be reprinted by the Foundation. Bobby's already mentioned that the Howard correspondence is available in 3 volumes from the Foundation, at least when it's reprinted, it will be. And if you want both sides of the 6-year, very interesting correspondence between Howard and Lovecraft, they're available in A Means to Freedom from Hippocampus Press, which is also not cheap, but at least available in paperback.
Yeah, they just re-released the trade paperback, a new edition of trade paperbacks.
Again, no. Then there's always Glenn Lord's The Last Celt for slices of biography and admittedly outdated bibliography, but it was the first good one. And just the pleasure of owning the book that really started serious Howard scholarship. If you think you might want to get into literary criticism, the best place to start is The Dark Barbarian, edited by Don Herron, and possibly its sequel, The Barbaric Triumph. Lastly, if you'd like a smorgasbord of literary criticism, scholarship, and fan viewpoints, there are a slew of Howard-related fanzines out there. They're always fun to read, such as has been mentioned, David Sasser's REH Lone Star Fictioneer. Right, that was, yes, Fenner, that's Arnie Fenner's Lone Star Fictionaire, Sasser's REH Two Gun Raconteur, and Leo Grin's The Cimmerian, which are not hard to pick up on eBay.
All right, cool. So let's go back in time a little bit before we run out of time and start getting back to some of the more, tougher things to find and pricier collectibles, all right? So we talked about the 60s and 70s to some degree. Of course, the Lancer paperbacks are probably some of the bigger collectibles in the 60s. There's also Almuric was released in paperback in 1964. In the 1950s, we had the Gnome editions, of course. These were the first ones that DeCamp became involved with, beginning, I believe, with the second one. Is that third one? Third one, maybe. There were 6 volumes. The last one was had no Howard Conan in it, but that was where we first started getting the DeCamp versions of the stories appeared in this series. But these are still very collectible books. They're also fairly affordable as early collectibles go. You can get copies, anywhere from $150 to $200 in jacket. Nice copies. Really high-grade copies go for more. But they're fairly plentiful. They're not hard to come by.
If you want to buy one, just go on the ABE or the dedicated website. It's just a question of money.
I got a couple back at my table. But there's also a paperback in the 1950s. Conan the Conqueror was released as a paperback in 1952.
Three.
Is it 3? Yeah, as an ace double. Has a Lee Brackett story on the other side. Anybody familiar with the ace doubles? You guys know these, right? The paperbacks. You got one story on one side, you flip it over, and you have it on the other. So it's got a cool Lee Brackett story on the other side. It's actually kind of nice. It's a beautiful Norm Saunders. If people are familiar with Norm Saunders, a famous pulp artist, cover artist. He did a beautiful depiction of Conan that looks nothing like Conan.
Yeah.
Beautiful painting, looks nothing like Conan. It's a beautiful painting of a Roman centurion.
Longer tradition. The one tough book from the 1950s is a Conan one, but it's not one of the known press.
Right.
It's the British version.
Yes.
One of the first volume, Conan the Conqueror, which appeared in 1954 in the UK under the same title. And this was published by T.D. Boardman. And this is really, really rare. And by rare, I mean if you go any day on the ABE and try to find a copy, you simply won't find one.
I've seen 3 ever for sale. And Patrice owns one of those.
And I have one.
You got one?
I have one.
Silent auction tonight.
Oh.
There is a Boardman in the silent auction.
Excellent.
With a jacket?
No.
Hold on.
That's my evil green.
Yeah, I just got outbid on one actually not too long ago, but I was being cheap. So in the 1940s, one way to collect some very cheaply some Howard stuff from the 1940s were the Avon fantasy readers. These were digest size. I didn't bring them with me, but Donald Wollheim was the editor for Avon during that period, and he was always a big Howard fan. And so he published a number of not just Howard stories, but other reprints from Weird Tales in his digest-size Avon fantasy readers in the late 1940s. You can find several Howard stories in there. Again, with Howard looking Roman and some of the artwork, but
yes.
yeah, what can you do?
Polish colors, but nothing like
Yeah.
that.
But also during this period, the 40s and 50s, the biggest collectibles probably that are accessible from that period would be probably the three Arkham Howards. These are always high on everyone's list of collectibles. And the first one came out in 1946. Of course, how many people are familiar with Arkham House, the publisher, Derleth, that Derleth put out? It's ostensibly to publish Lovecraft stuff, and then after that, the other Weird Tales writers. So Skullface and Others. This is one of the grails of Howard collecting. This was a hugely important book at the time. This was the first collection of Howard's works, sort of a best of, at least as Derleth saw it, and it is a very good selection of stories. This came out in 1936, and it's fairly available, if not affordable necessarily, depending on condition.
Yeah, condition is the key.
Condition is key and varies widely because it is available, so condition matters. High grade copies can go for as much as 1,000.
Yes.
You can pick up lower grade copies, in around 300, 400. So
Glenn told me one time that was the book that got him interested in Robert Howard.
it probably got a whole generation interested in Robert E. Howard. The first real organized fandom, Howard fandom, was a group called the Hyborian Legion in the 1950s. And for most of them, it was probably people that picked up this book a few years before and got involved in fandom. And then the names came out.
For people who are not book collectors, you have to know that the price of the book, the main factor is the condition, of course.
Right.
And for a book with a dust jacket, the same book without a dust jacket is worth
You can
1 to 9, 1 to 10, something like that.
Yeah,
If you have a mint Skullface and Others without the dust jacket, it's worth $100 to $200, something like that.
maybe 200,
Maybe 200.
maybe
If you have
200.
the exact same book with a mint dust jacket,
2,000.
it's 2,000.
Okay.
So the dust jacket was supposed to protect the book,
Right.
and now it's the dust jacket that is the key.
90% of the value is in the dust jacket.
Exactly. So when you find the book, the dust jacket is the one thing to look first.
Yeah. So that was 1946. In 1958, this was the first. Was it 7? Yeah, 7. Glenn Lord this was Glenn Lord's first publication.
Yes.
Yes,
First
this
edited
was.
volume. Always Comes Evening, a collection of Howard's poetry. This is the toughest of the Arkham houses to get. This is the rarest of the Arkham houses. 635 copies. 36. Jerk. The last
I'm the
100.
guy with the numbers.
The last 100 of them were printed with the lettering on the spine going in the opposite direction. This is the toughest of the Arkham House Howards to get for sure.
There were, by way of comparison, there were 3,000 copies, 3,00004 copies exactly in the Skullface and Others.
Yep.
So it's fairly common.
Right.
And 636, this is tough.
That's tough. And then The Dark Man and Others came out in 1965. This is the last of the three. 1963? I'm off today. This was a collection of his horror stories that came out. And this one's easier to get and less expensive. $150, $200. $250 maybe for high grade copies. So easy enough to find. So those are the three Arkham houses. Those are very collectible. A lot of people collect Arkham House outside of just Howard collectors. So those are big. So pulps. What do you got, Bobby?
No, let me just hit on one or two small points before we
Sure.
get to the pulps. When we talk about numbers, as far as what's collectible, what's rare, something like Conan the Barbarian #1 was printed in hundreds of thousands of copies. Now, this will still go for $100, $300, depending on condition, not counting CTC or any of that nonsense. But if you want to read the story, it's a lot cheaper because it was reprinted in the British edition, and it was reprinted in another British Pocket Digest edition, and it was collected in mass market trade paperback before there were trade paperbacks. And you can find a lot of this stuff if you just want to read the material fairly cheaply. So if you're just reading to read, don't aim for the highest grade stuff. But we're talking about stuff that, with the pulps, they had print runs in hundreds of thousands or millions, but it didn't last. Pulps are trash material, they degrade quickly, the paper's acidic, it flakes, it breaks, and it was ephemeral literature at the time. People there were a few collectors, but they were a few. There are always stories about people that, it's got a Margaret Brothers cover on Weird Tales. They'd rip the cover off so that nobody would see it and think they had pornography. But so when we talk about numbers, we're talking about a lot of the new stuff is published in fairly large numbers, and you can find it fairly affordably if you're patient, if you just want a reading copy. But when we get down to stuff that was only produced in 100 copies or 200 copies, or the stuff that just doesn't keep and age well, that's when it gets rare, that's when it gets expensive. So let's go.
Sure. So we'll talk about pulps. Now, many pulps were published in several 100,000 copies. Weird Tales was not. The best numbers we have on Weird Tales for circulation at its height was probably somewhere between 50 and 100,000, give or take, at its peak, which would be the late 20s, going into the early 30s. For Howard, I think everyone knows Howard primarily wrote for Weird Tales, although he wrote for a number of different genre pulps. But he's best known for his Weird Tales stories. His first appearance was in the July 1925 issue of Weird Tales. This is a copy of it here. This has a story, Spear and Fang, which was a caveman story. It was Cro-Magnon versus Neanderthals. These early Weird Tales, these are tough. These are tough to find. I collect these, and my copy is a beat copy that's been chewed by bugs, and I was well loved by bugs, apparently, and I was happy to get it because these are tough, very tough. A few more in here, just a few of the Weird Tales. Oh, I don't have the first Conan. I did have a first appearance of Conan in Weird Tales, but I traded it for Frazetta Sketch, and I haven't replaced it yet, so I'm working on that. So I don't have that, but
I had it.
I know you do. I have had it. I'll have it again. I have the first Solomon Kane in here, though. I was going to share that. This has Worms of the Earth, The Dark Man. Howard covers generally go for more than non-cover stories. But the keys are the first Solomon Kane issue. Obviously the first, Spear and Fang. The first Conan is the biggie. That's in high grade, it's $1,000, $1,500, even $2,000, pulp in really high grade.
The Batwoman cover?
What's that?
The Batwoman cover.
Yeah, the and not for Howard, but because of the cover, the Batwoman.
Iconic cover.
Yeah, it's an iconic cover.
HPL.
That's also a four-figure.
Trinity.
Right. So there's a few other ones that are expensive, not because of Howard, because of the other content in it. But the Weird Tales, the later ones, the Conan ones, there's 9 Weird Tales issues that have Conan stories on the cover. Only 3 of those actually feature Conan himself. Of those, 2 of them feature Conan in a very un-Conan-like position, laying down, all passive. This is the only cover that actually shows Conan being Conan, fighting a giant snake. But some of the other covers, this is a famously risque cover for Red Nails. It still is somewhat amazing that these were selling on the newsstand in 1934, 35, 36. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. But Weird Tales are fairly, especially the later ones, are fairly easy to come by.
Because these were read and collected.
They were read and collected.
Nerds.
Right. Remember I talked about these guys that were doing these fanzines in the early 30s? This was the beginning of fandom. It was also the beginning of collecting, and they did collect these. Tougher ones are some of the other genres.
Exactly. You want fight stories and action stories and generic pulps like that are very much harder to come by simply because people read them and tossed them away.
Right.
So
Fight stories, these guys are these are tough.
Really tough to find. I mean, you just don't find them.
This one's a tough one. Again, mine's low grade. It took me forever just to find this beat copy. This is an El Barak cover story here, in Complete Stories. This is actually Street and Smith pulp. It's kind of amazing. Even Street and Smith's a big publisher, but some of their titles are really tough to find.
Ghost Stories from McDonald's.
One of the westerns, Cowboy Stories. That one's fairly tough as well. Oriental Stories was a companion magazine to Weird Tales. It was published by the same publisher and same editor. This is a Howard cover. This is a story that he actually co-wrote with Tevis Clyde Smith, and many of you heard about it. I think it was really mostly Howard doing the writing.
It's only him.
Yeah, you know.
There
There you go. There's Bobby's got the rare comic adaptation. I've got one of those too. That's cool. That's a fun one. So just to give you a few ideas of some of the other ones, this is the first appearance of Red Sonja. Of course, it's Red Sonja with a Y, not J. You all know that story, right? That the Red Sonja that most people are familiar with, the Marvel Comics version, was taken from Howard's original version, which was a historical fiction novel or story. That first appeared in Magic Carpet, which is what Oriental Stories became. So Howard also wrote for the Spiceys. She-Devil by Sam Walzer. Sam Walzer is a pseudonym, a nom de plume that Howard used. How's my French? You know, he didn't want to write for the spicy pulps under his real name. Yeah, the Spiceys were sort of the closest we had. It's kind of soft porn, you know. This is in the days before Playboy and Penthouse and these sorts of things. The spicy pulps were somewhat more risque than your regular pulps. By today's standards, they're actually not all that risque. You know.
What's interesting about those is they were published in two different versions. And on some copies, you have a star on the cover, and the lady, which was usually featured in the cover, would have both clothes for whatever reason. And this would go in the southern states of the U.S. mostly.
Yes, they had a censored version. That's right. So if you look for the star on the cover, that's the censored version. You know.
We still have an example of that today. The one Conan the Barbarian comic book that was recalled because it had a topless cover.
Do you have a copy?
Yeah, it's in the box.
Oh, wait a minute. We're in a church. Can you show this? I don't know. Are we allowed? I don't know. He's going to do it anyway. You never know what you're going to see at Howard Days.
So this is the unbared edition.
Gasp.
Do you know these guys? Hello?
Which issue is that, Bobby? Which issue is that?
It's 25. Conan, 24. The Dark Horse series.
First Dark Horse series.
Yeah. So that's kind of an overview. There were a few books, though, in the 1930s. A lot of people don't realize that Howard was published in book form in the 1930s, even in his lifetime. I didn't bring it with me. I have a copy of, he had a poem published in a book in 1933, Modern American Poetry. It was a poetry anthology. That one's fairly tough to come by. I still need a copy in jacket. But he was also collected in 3 very rare volumes that were published in Great Britain in 1932, 33, and 34. There was this was a series, an anthology series, edited by Christine Campbell Thompson. It's called the Not at Night series. It started in the mid-1920s, and it ran through the mid-1930s. And they published a number of Weird Tales reprints. Farnsworth Wright, editor of Weird Tales, made a deal with this British publisher to reprint some tales. So there's Lovecraft stories reprinted in here, Clark Ashton Smith, Frank Belknap Long. You know, a lot of the writers that we know from Weird Tales were reprinted in book form in these editions. And Howard appeared in 3 of these. I only have 2 of them, sadly. But this is one of them. This one has Worms of the Earth. It's called Keep on the Light. The one before that was Grim Death, and that's when even Patrice doesn't have one of those.
No, but I have.
Oh no! But do you have the other 2?
No.
This is yes. So this one has Worms of the Earth. And this
is the first time Conan was ever published in hardcover.
That's right. This has Rogues in the House in it. So this is the first book to have a Conan story in it. The first time Conan was published in book form.
They are very, very difficult to come by. I mean, finding them is tough. Finding them in dust jacket is tougher. Finding them in excellent dust jacket is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, those are tough.
Yeah, here's one collecting tip. One of the best ways to get a better collection is to outlive the other collectors.
Yeah. You laugh, but there's a couple of older collectors that have some things I've got an eye on. How you doing? How you feeling? checking. Okay. So wait, wasn't there one other book in the 1930s that came out that had Howard in it? I forget. That was published in England, maybe? No? Okay. I thought there was something else. Wait, wasn't there?
Oh yeah, maybe one.
1937?
1937, there was one.
What was it called? Does anyone remember? Gent. Oh, that's
Gent
right. The
from
Gent from Bear Creek.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Gent.
Ah, I forgot about that one. Now that's this is probably the toughest one to find of all. There's what 16, 17 known copies.
Lee just wrote an article for
Yes.
the
Yeah,
REH Foundation newsletter. Lee, can you tell us
17.
more about the Gent?
Tell us about the Gent from Bear Creek.
Well, yes, there was 17 known copies now. There were
Use the mic.
couple thousand.
Use the mic.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Couple thousand or so were originally published.
No, we don't know, but
We don't
probably
know?
Probably
in the,
less.
several hundred.
Yeah.
Okay, really.
Yeah.
Under 1,000 probably.
And the reason
mic.
so few survive was that. Oh yes. They were only sold in the UK and the Commonwealth, but then not even mostly to individuals, but to lending libraries, which is how most people would have read it. And those libraries would just tear off the covers. That's why there's only a couple of covers
You look so
that are
sad when you
still.
say that.
So, as I say, there's only about 17 known.
17 known copies,
Only
and 7, I think, are in institutions. So the British
Right.
Library, the Bodleian Library,
Yes.
forget the other ones.
Right.
Cambridge.
So there are 10 copies
Yes.
That are
in
available.
circulation
Right.
for collectors.
Yeah.
And of course, the interesting thing, we are in Cross Plains, and thanks to the generosity of Mr. Leo Green, Cross Plains has one copy in our community. Hold the mic, please. And
Yeah.
this is one of the 17 surviving copies, and this is at the Howard House when it's going to be there at the end of the afternoon after we're done with this. So if you want to see one, not to touch it, but to see it, you can do that. And
Yeah.
if you remember, a couple of years ago, we had special guests, Brad and Jeff Howard family, and they are related to the Howard family. And so I got in touch with them first time was in 2008, I think, and they came down 2 years ago, and they had a surprise because there's James Howard, and they brought their own copy. This is the Howard family copy of the Gent. And so it's in pretty rough shape, as you can see, and you'll see later on. But the interesting thing about this book is that it was sent by Doc Howard, and it's inscribed to his sister, and so it came down all the way to James and his family. And so what you have before you, ladies and gentlemen, is 2 copies of the James and James together at the same time. This must have, this
Well,
is, oh,
wait,
and maybe
wait.
you have heard that some time ago, Mr. Liebrecht
Yeah.
had here.
Yeah, well, just recently, one popped up on eBay, and some jerk outbid me.
Yeah, baby. Way to go, Lee. Right.
I was the underbidder, damn it.
I don't
A
know.
lot.
Okay, sure.
Yep, there we go.
Oh,
So
that's
there we
3
have it.
copies.
Three
Wow,
gents from
we
Bear
are making
Creek.
history.
This has probably never been done before. 3 gents from Bear Creek in one place.
Surely we can't do any more than that.
As some of you may know, 7 years ago, I was lucky enough to go on ABE, and I got these automatic searches on, and I get an email with a notification for a gent from Bear Creek for sale, £20. Click.
Let me add to the story. For those of you who know, I'm an archaeologist, right? I was literally out in the woods digging a hole when my phone started blowing up. right? I'm literally, it's Patrice from France texting me. Oh my God! I could hear his voice through the text, right? His, I think I just got the Egyptian record, but I don't know. It could be the report. I don't know. What do I do? Should I email him? I don't want to hit by it now. I don't know what to do. Like, all right, be cool, man. Send him an email, but be cool. He did. It turned out it was the real deal. There it is. And this is one of the nicest.
We have 17 copies, 10 in private collections, and this is by far the second best surviving copy. All the other ones, the 8 other ones are in pretty rotten shape. So for £20, that was a good deal.
So,
yo, you don't agree with me? Okay.
Well,
Yes, this is history. This is history in the making, because that's probably the first and last time you're going to see 4 copies of the Gen together. Maybe you shouldn't be taking these photos now. Because thing is, I have just sold this copy.
What?
I have just sold this. I sold it about 2 weeks ago because I needed the cash.
To come here?
And I made a good return on my investment. And this is going to the collection of one good guy, who's Bob Lumpkin, who lives in Illinois, I think.
Yes.
And he's a dedicated collector. And the reason I needed that money was to finance my next purchase.
drum roll, please.
Look at that.
And this is the only copy in the world with that jacket.
All right.
Let's talk about the convenience here too. This copy was originally August Derleth's copy, which he gave to Glenn Lord. So this is Glenn Lord's copy. This is the only copy of jacket. The only reason we know what the dust jacket looks like is because of this copy. It has August Derleth's ownership signature in it.
Yeah. If you want to take a look, just take a look. You can read August Derleth, his copy. So, well, I got the shakes, can you please do that fast?
No touching.
Nobody sneeze.
What if you blow me in?
You shake so much.
Man, look at all the ARs that are on the table.
All right. Let's just tell a story. Here we go.
The nerd in me is gloating, yeah, sure. I mean, this is the Holy Grail hard collectibles. You simply can top that. And this was the copy, but really equally important to me is the fact that this was Glenn's copy, Glenn Lord's copy. And this means a lot to me, as much as a nerd, yeah, I'm a nerd, okay. But Glenn's copy, it's special for me. That was one of the reasons why I went after this book when it was offered. And so you have 5 copies of the Gen before you, and I don't think that anyone is going to ever see 5 copies together again in your lifetimes. Probably not. You wanted to say something, Jeff?
I did. Just to tell the story. The funny story was, what freaks us out as collectors is when we see very fragile things not protected the way they should be. You notice all of these dust jackets are in Mylar. These are called Brodarts. You put on dust jackets to keep them from getting fragile. Like we said, 90% of the value is in the dust jacket. When you have a dust jacket that's the only one surviving in the world, when Patrice got this yesterday, the dust jacket still was not in a Brodart. So just seeing pictures of this was just making my heart have palpitations. Fortunately, I knew this was the case. I brought a roll of Brodart to put it on the jacket when we got here. So we got it yesterday. Patrice and I both go back to my hotel room just trying to put the plastic on this. He's shaking. I'm sweating, like trying to do it, right? I mean, with the towel there, like, Patrice, mop my brow, like a nurse, right? As we're trying to put the plastic on this. I mean, you should have seen the two of us. It was really ridiculous.
That was
funny. Carefully. Usually I can slap a Brodart on one of these things in about a minute. It must have taken us 15 minutes to put this Brodart on.
And I just washed my hand before.
Oh yeah, we washed our hands. You should. It was funny. You should have seen us. completely out of, not in control, shaking. It's an amazing thing. It really is.
If you have any questions, now I think we've got 4 minutes. So if you have any questions, now is the time.
I got a question.
Uh-oh.
How are you guys feeling?
Anyway, in libraries, especially in America or across the world, how many things do you figure might be in old Carnegie libraries or are there now? Do you have any idea?
Do you mean in terms of books or
Yeah, books.
like the Gent?
Well, that or anything. I mean, are they in American
go ahead.
libraries?
Well, there would be no more gents because they were all in the UK
UK, right.
institution, except for the Ranger.
The Ranger?
College,
Uh-huh.
Texas has a copy of the gent.
And the one in Cross Plains, of course.
But
Yeah.
not just the Gent, but of Howard's
Well,
books.
the pulps, they didn't interest libraries
Right.
at first, and it's only fairly recent that they have taken an interest into getting pulp magazine,
Right.
and so they got for some collectors.
Yes.
Because collectors, tend to keep care of this stuff.
There are now a few universities that have collections of pulps and fanzines and things, but they're special collections. Bowling Green has the largest fanzine collection. The Syracuse University has all of the Street and Smith pulps, which are mostly the Shadow, Doc Savage, but a number of Howard pulps as well, Top Notch and some other ones. And so there are a few university collections out there. University of Iowa now has a large collection that was donated by a big pulp collector.
When
So there
all
are
co-
a few out there, but they're special collections.
UC
you know.
Riverside.
UC
Iowa
Riverside.
State is good.
Yeah.
When all collectors die and Jeff is not aware of that, they go to library.
How you feeling, Patrice?
Yeah.
Chirpy!
I'm a historian. I took some training in archival
Mhm.
protection.
Yes.
One of the items people use sometimes for asset is Wato to save the pages.
Yes.
If you do that to a pulp, does that lessen the value or have no effect on the value?
That's a great question. I'm also, as an archaeologist, I deal with preserving archival things as well. And so I also collect Golden Age comics, which has a similar paper, paper problem that pulps do, which is this pulp paper contains lignin, which is, well, essentially it's the pulp paper is eating itself as we speak right now. It's acidic, and collecting pulps and Golden Age comics for that reason with this paper is a battle against time. It's really a holding action. Everything you do is just trying to prevent it from degrading anymore. I don't know much that deacidification is being done much with pulps. With comics, it has been done, and it's considered restoration, and it definitely lessens the value, which is ridiculous. And there are a number of people that are trying to convince collectors, like, look, you have to do this, or they won't exist in 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. They're going to be gone. And so that is something that comic collectors are wrestling with now. Pulp collectors, I don't think, have thought about it. I store my high value pulps I use the backboards. For example, this is the backboards I'm using. They're very thick. These are called fullbacks, and it's not just acid-free paper, but they contain a carbon buffer layer in between there that absorbs a lot of the off-gassing so that these pulps aren't just stewing in their own gases, eating themselves. Climate is huge. They need to be stored in low humidity, cool climate. So if you're serious about this, oh God, yikes. Hold this. Thank you. You do have to take steps to prevent them from just deteriorating, just as we're speaking here right now. Bags are Mylar, of course, which is archival, rather than polypropylene, which are like the comic book bags that most people are probably familiar with. We use Mylar now for everything. So yes, you have, especially with the pulps, you have to really take these things into account and understand a little bit about paper conservation, if you want them to survive. Because all we're doing is slowing down their own self-destruction as much as we can, and it's a sad thing, but yeah, inevitably, and some of these fanzines, I mean, they're all brittle. That you can't get them any other way. These were made, some of these, were only made, in 50, 75, 100 copies even to start with. They were people, putting them out on little mimeograph machines, paper
Hectograph.
that, or hectograph even, right? Stapled, and they're just incredibly fragile. You can't imagine how fragile they are. It's amazing that any of these even survive, and very few do. It's tough. It's an issue, storage.
There are companies out there that are scanning
Mhm.
these, like, is it Girasol?
Yeah, Girosol's been doing reprints of some of the pulps.
But they stopped.
They stopped.
They've stopped,
So you
yeah.
can get- they've stopped until they sell them all.
Yeah.
But there's still quite a few on
Right.
sale on eBay if you want to get them.
Yeah, there are more questions? Okay.
You gotta wrap it up.
Okay, let's get one more question. Last one, okay.
Realistically, none of us live forever.
Right.
I mean, you gentlemen who have these wonderful collections, do you have plans of what you will do with?
Jeff, I like you. You're my best friend, you know that?
Adopt some of us.
Do you have plans?
Yeah.
I get your gift when you die, right? Is that, okay.
Will.
You promised me that, right? Okay. It's in your will, right? Okay.
Well, I'm thinking now, the Bowling Green University, their fanzine collection. So, I would seriously consider, donating mine to them. So,
Yeah. I have, I also collect comics and first editions and a number of other things. So I've got different people for my wife to contact if something happens to me so that she can make a few bucks. I'll be worth a lot more dead than alive, that's for sure. There's a comic guy she's supposed to contact, there's a pulp guy, there's a book guy, I've given, she knows who to get in touch
You
with.
have thought about this.
That's right, I have absolutely thought about it because she's not gonna know what to do with all this stuff, so I've got trustworthy people that, for her to go to, but, yeah.